The time clock functionality allows you to capture staff time and attendance in real time. OnTarget will record the location and device of the user clocking in and out, along with validating that the clock in and outs are within acceptable range of the site where services are to be rendered. Reminders can be sent to staff if they forget to clock in or out of their shift. This is often the primary way of capturing staff's time for payroll purposes, and not to be confused with the alternate way that OnTarget captures time, which is based on the start and end time of the note. The distinction is usually based on the service type. More often than not, clock in and out is used for residential or daily services, while community-based services or periodic services are configured to pay staff based on billable time from the staff's note documentation, which allows you to integrate your payroll to your billing. OnTarget is equipped to handle both instances. Any clock in and out records can be tracked on each user's dashboard and can also be managed at a global level at the Timeclocks desktop. This course will focus on this desktop and the multiple uses for it. As with all desktops, Timeclocks is only visible once access is provided in securities. Since the users who will most likely benefit the most from this desktop are supervisors and the managers of staff who will be clocking in and out of their shifts, it is important that the security permissions allow them access to the respective approval buttons. Most supervisors will also need the ability to manually add and edit the clock-in records in order to assist their staff as needed. All of these buttons are managed in securities. You may grant the direct care staff access to the Timeclocks desktop, but it is typically not needed at this level since they will manage their own clock-in records from the dashboard. If you do open this desktop to your direct care staff, you will want to be very intentional with any approval right, as this would be the means for getting paid against clock-in records that may not be within range of their scheduled work site. You can open this up to staff but disable these particular functions. Both approving and the adding of manual time clock records would be discouraged for the users that are actually clocking in and clocking out, as those are more supervisory type functions. As you are probably already gathering, the primary function of this desktop is to audit time clock records. Audits of clock-in or clock-out records that were not within the acceptable radius of the worksite will need to be performed routinely for each pay period, since staff will not get paid until these records are reviewed and approved by someone. Let's take a look at some auditing and approving practices. You have lots of search criteria to be able to drill into your records. We will review some of the common ways to search. You can search by individual employee, or maybe it's easier to look at all time records within your actual pay period. Further, if you only want to review the records for the staff that you supervise, you may enter your name in the Reports To field. In order to review the clock in and clock out records that are not in range of the site, choose No for the in-range clock in to start whittling down your results. You may also choose to look at your clock out records that are also not in range to review them all together. To be sure that you are reviewing only the records that have not yet been approved, it is also recommended to set the clock in status filter to unapproved. You will now be looking at all clock-in records for the entered date range where the staff recorded a clock in or clock out and they were not within the acceptable radius of their work site. When analyzing this, you'll see the employee, the date, who the supervisor is, the site in which they clocked in, whether or not it's linked to a timesheet. In this case, it couldn't be yet because these are unapproved records. The clock in time, and the clock in location. Note that these will hyperlink out to a map. This allows you to really hone in and analyze where they were when they clocked in. and an indicator of how far away from the site they were. You can also see the device they used to clock in, and then the corresponding clock out information, the time, the clock out location, and the device. If you determine that the location of the clock in and out is legitimate, then approve accordingly. You can do so individually or all at once if you've inspected all the records in the grid. Here we are receiving a warning message that the time clock record was successfully approved, but the caregiver will not get paid until there's an associated pay type. The pay type setup is critical for running the employee timesheet report and also for running payroll. That same warning message will be displayed for missing pay types when trying to perform either of those functions, and there are approved time clocks without pay types. You may also use the pay type associated filter to search for any records without that setup to get in front of those error messages. You can then set up the corresponding pay types in the employee record in the Pay Types tab. The pay type will need to reflect the cost center and the service in which they were working. Another important filter at the bottom here allows you to search for records where staff clocked in but forgot to clock out. Let me clear these filters so we can take a look at that. Choosing yes will return all clock-ins where the staff forgot to clock out. I can edit this record to then enter in their actual clock out time for payroll purposes. Other than approving the out-of-range clock in and clock out records, the other primary function of this desktop is that it can be a means for supporting staff with any issues they have when clocking in or out. You can manually add time as needed by choosing the employee, the site they were scheduled to work at, the date, and choosing the shift they are trying to clock in or out for. If there is no shift available, then you'll need to go to the scheduler to add one in. Then plug in the time in which they are to be paid for. The system will throw any errors if the entered time overlaps with another. You can use this filter to search for all manually entered and adjusted times.